There's growing uncertainty about when, or even if, the IRS plan for spending the $80 billion will be publicly released. I understand that you have not been involved in that because you are not the IRS commissioner yet, but you probably will be if your nomination proceeds, as it looks like it will. It's a widely shared view that the IRS must release this plan in real time and allow stakeholders to provide feedback. If you are confirmed as the IRS commissioner, would you agree that the plan to spend the $80 billion will be publicly released and that you will allow public feedback from stakeholders and others on it?
Senator, I appreciate the question. I agree that the plan that is put together should allow both you, this committee, and the public to connect the dollars from the Inflation Reduction Act to the various activities and investments. And, you know, I really want to earn this committee's trust. I think as a former budgeteer, I will earn your trust by putting together a very clear plan that articulates where the money is going. And as a former OMB controller, I hope to earn your trust in terms of making sure that those funds are spent wisely. So I think you and I are sharing the same value, Senator. Let's be public about the plans, and let's make sure that we're building trust in the way forward.
Well, thank you, and I'll take that as a commitment that you will publicly release the plan. As you know, and as has already been discussed here at the hearing, I'm very concerned about the use of the funds for the enforcement part of the plan. We have never had an argument in this committee about whether we need to give the IRS the necessary resources to bring itself technologically into the 21st century and to get the adequate response to the taxpayers that they now don't get, so that the IRS can even answer the telephone, so to speak, when taxpayers are trying to communicate with them. The battle has been over this completely uncontrolled and undefined commitment of 60% of the $80 billion to enforcement. And there's been a lot of talk about, well, we only want to enforce this against those who are rich, super rich tax cheats. But yet when I brought that amendment I referenced earlier, no one would support it and put that right into the law. So I want to get into that. From the IRS's own data, the two largest single components of the tax gap, that's the difference between taxes owed and paid, are small businesses, small business income, and individual non-business income. In response to my questions, the Nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation told us that these shortfalls are overwhelming. They are upwards of 90%, and upwards to 90% of these shortfalls fall on hardworking Americans with modest incomes, far under $400,000. Now, Secretary Yellen reportedly has said she's directed the IRS not to use this somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 billion to enforce against people with incomes less than $400,000. My colleague, the chair, has said that is not to be done. What I want to know is, how strong will you make that commitment? The language we've gotten from the Secretary was in this term of, well, we want to get balance. I don't want to know balance. I want to know whether you are going to commit today that the plan will not allow this supersized enforcement money to be utilized against people who make less than $400,000 per year. Will you make that commitment?
Senator, yes, and I made that commitment in my official statement for the record. I am committed to Secretary Yellen's directive on how the audit should move forward under the Inflation Reduction Act, and look forward to working with you and you holding me accountable for that.
Well, thank you. Secretary Yellen's statement leaves a lot of wiggle room. I want to be sure you know that I don't expect to see wiggle room in this commitment. Last question. There's been a lot of debate in the last Congress that was stopped finally, but some of us are concerned that it's not over, about whether the IRS should have the authority to get into people's bank accounts if they make over $600 a year or spend over $600 a year. And then some said, well, we'll make that $10,000 a year as the target point, or $10,000 a year spending or depositing. there's a lot of concern about the intent at the IRS to move forward with some plan. We've stopped it here legislatively in the battles in Congress last year. I want to know whether there are any intentions at the IRS or any intention on your part to regulatorily seek to expand the ability of the IRS to literally invade and look into the bank accounts of Americans simply because they have deposited more than $600 or $10,000 or whatever number into their account.
Senator, I'll go back to my background. I'm a rule follower, and I would only take actions that are consistent with what the IRS authorities are under the law. But I'll also say this. I think about effective tax administration as requiring a bunch of different factors, reducing paperwork burden on the public, but also avoiding unnecessary intrusion. So if we're going to take a step, I'm going to want to make sure this committee is comfortable that A, we've taken that step consistent with what our parameters are in the law, and B, that we've made the right balancing decision that this is the right step to do in the interest of the taxpayer and balances the importance of not invoking unnecessary intrusion. And my commitment is to hold to these factors and work with you collaboratively to make sure we balance them effectively.
Well, I would hope that you wouldn't seek any plan like I just described, which I think is a violation of the privacy of our American citizens, unless Congress directed it.